it was important for me to actively notice and focus and use language to describe what I was experiencing while I was there. So I spent that month there writing about the dark in every possible way. My quick go-to sense for anything I'm writing is visual. You know, it's the easiest for me to see. But in the dark, it's not. And that meant that I started to think more about what I was hearing or how the air felt, that, you know, the textures of things, anything else. And so I came at the dark day after day, like literally during the day I would write, and at night I would go out and walk around. And it was August, it was pretty hot. I was out there at dusk and for the hours after, thinking, experiencing it, but also thinking about what it felt like to be there and how I could describe it and how I could describe it in a new way from how I described it the day before. How my language needed to shift so that I was not just repeating myself. So I thought I'd read you one poem or two poems maybe from the book that resulted from that experience that was published by the nonprofit arm of Grand Canyon called Grand Canyon Conservancy. And so you can see what I did with the time there. So I'll read two poems from this. Inner Planets. After all day in the sun blitz, the hectic heat calling for argument and splurging on low spots, I wanted most to be busy with less. After the terraces of light, the spreading iron and groping of it, I walked alone, never to an end, and quietly, yes, sat there and sang the intimate shapes of Earth's history, the fringe above and the physical flourish of stars. Never to anyone, just my miniature self. It was like being in love with the world as a stranger, alive in the slagged dark that made this out of nothing. I was not prepared for the far-off storm with its thrilling embellishments or its thin revolutionary drawings of light, or how, when those ended, the sky was taken to a circumference of thrumming in 100 subtracted overtones. I sat still in that struck concentration, cleaning up the ways I believe. How so often we are given to evidence the dark robs us of hope, and we can't see that it isn't that we need to see. Noble, it climbs through persistence and lets us turn our cold faces up to it, unfit but astonished. The sky does what it must, and it is never the same thing. There is no air in space, no sound the higher you go. So I was at the Grand Canyon for a month. Totally recommend this way of experiencing a place, any place, of actually settling in, which we never get to do when we're on vacation, right? We like fly in, often literally drive in, fly in, and do everything in a hurry because there's so much to see and do. And you have to hit all the best things. But being at the canyon for that expansive amount of time meant I could watch the sunset 30 days in a row. I could watch the darkness over and over, and it was different all the time. About halfway through the month that I was there, I started a project. It was a crowdsourced poem. I put out these sort of prompts, statements to complete in every gift shop and visitor center on the South Rim, and little boxes for people to drop their responses in. And we got hundreds of responses. It was great. From the people who were visiting the canyon in that month or in those few weeks. I took all those responses, had to translate some of them, and built a poem that was again, kind of like that fire poem I read you. It was other people's sense. Like, I had been writing about the canyon, how I experienced it, and the darkness, the dark over and around the canyon, how I experienced it day after day, night after night. And I, after a while, thought, I'm tired of listening to myself and my experience. Let me turn it out to other people and see how they experience it. So I took those responses and spent a couple of days holed up in the apartment that I was staying in, which was not hard because I walked down to Phantom Ranch a few days before that, to the bottom of the canyon, and came back up, and I could barely move. So, so it was entirely possible to just hang out and do this. The poem is in 8 parts. It's in the phases of the moon. I'm just going to read you the first part and the last part so you can see what can happen when you pull voices together. And then I will tell you a little story, and then I'll open it to questions. So the whole poem is called Look Up, Look Out, Look Infinite. And this section is called Waxing Crescent. The sun chased away by the wolf pack of night. Tonight I am safe in the blurring, endless sky, letting go the burdens of muscle. I am going to pause thinking and start feeling. The light plays tricks, flecks pink, orange, lavender. In the ocean of night swim celestial fishes, little cricket songs. Stars, the past beacons, dream the ground, wink, beckoning, bring us outside and together. Tonight I will listen to the whisperly creak, the grand scheme, ugly and beautiful at the same time. Night is the reality, dark, a thick blanket. We are not alone, but we are small. The stars numbered one by one, the eyes of angels. I remember about silence. Tonight I will see in the absence of light. I am the light in the darkness. And the last part of this community poem is called New Moon. Keep in mind, these are many, many other people's words. They are not my words. New moon. The sun tucked us in, moon downs until tomorrow. The sky turns to dark blue, then black. It feels like a sigh. We often forget to look up. Night is settled, a very black backdrop. Star chandeliers hang on the roof of the canyon. Eerie silence. I hear nothing but breeze. Do stars even know how much they shine? All night, silver glimmers of longing, turning our glances from unfulfilled promises. Nighttime of peace, the dark lingers unknown. Here I stand with myself, all flows. I see the red of Mars. Here I see the future, and here the past. How do you sleep? Bien, merci. In the first hours of the new day, in the opposite side of the world, everything seems a gift. Tonight I am sky, dirt, and water. Tonight I will fly. How do you sleep? Hopefully, longingly, with desire and joy. So I came back from that very still, spacious, really quite solitary month and arrived back in New Mexico. And I think, I don't know, 4 days later, started as New Mexico Poet Laureate. So real culture shock. Going from the openness to a sudden kind of intensity of time and activity. And I'm happy to talk about the Poet Laureate anything, but I will say that I came back really interested in that crowdsourced approach and wanting to do more of it. And that was really how the New Mexico Epic Poem Project began, because I wanted to go to rural communities and distant communities and communities that hardly get attention and have their voices and their landscape and their perspectives held in a way that we all could see and read and hear about them. And that's what I spent the next 3 years doing, was traveling around to further and further places and involving people in conversations and readings and discussions about poetry. What is it? What your voice is for? You know, anything. And then gathering responses from them, very targeted in about where they were, gathering those, bringing those back, and working with my partner in all of this, New Mexico Arts, to build poems of their communities. So we have visited, it's a little amorphous, I think 25 or 26 of the 33 counties of New Mexico, and built poems for each of them. And the poems, again, it's really easy for me to sort of laud these poems, to just be wowed by these poems, because they are not my words at all. I mean, yes, I was the architect, I built them, but the poems are extraordinary, and I really can't wait. And they're embargoed right now, but I cannot wait until we get to share them first with the communities themselves, but also with the general public. So, so look forward to that. Yeah.
I have a question about that. How were you received in these far-flung communities? Who came, to the call that must have been put out by librarians? How did you structure that so to invite people in the communities to feel comfortable enough to come?
Yeah, we talked about it as a community poetry event, and later, as we went along, we started talking about it as a community event, because just the word poetry can be very off-putting. We explained that was how we needed voices for their community poems. So that was in the initial call, in the initial announcement. We did them in any place where community gathered. So sometimes that was libraries, coffee shops, community centers, art spaces. In Madrid, we did it at the local radio station, KMRD. In Abiquiu, we did it at a family ranch. We did it where people gathered, where people could freely come and be welcomed. And that, even that meant we got different people in different places, right? And then within the event itself, it was structured to be casual, open, welcoming, not a dangerous space. Like early on, my New Mexico arts partner, Michelle, early on said, we could make kits that we could send out to the communities we can't reach, because New Mexico's, geographically, it's the 5th biggest state. Population-wise, quite small, but that was, we tallied it. We went over 8,100 miles to reach these communities. So early on, she said, we can make kits and we could send them out places. And very quickly it became clear, no, that doesn't work. It has to come after the conversation, after the open mic that which was sometimes a community's first only ever open mic. And people didn't know they could read. They didn't know what they had been putting in their little blank books were poems or were writings worth sharing or anything. So it was really a whole, it was like a whole package. Like the writing came at the end of building a safe space.
How do you regard solitude as being a part of your creativity?
I miss it.
Yeah.
I think it's solitude is what gives me the space, not just to write, because for me that initial writing, like if I'm, there were 2 men who were just here who left, and the older one said, I'm sorry, it's been really interesting, we have to go, but I don't know if it was his son or whatever, but he got very inspired and wants to create something on his piano, and so we have to go now. And I said, that's perfect. That's actually, but that initial inspiration, that's easy. Like you don't need a huge amount of solitude. You're inspired, you pick up your phone or a scrap of paper and scribble it down. Where solitude's incredibly helpful, especially to me, is revision. So I can hear, so I can play, so I can make a mess and then turn around and make it a little less of a mess and allow all that. And so, yeah, so in that way, solitude's really valuable. Yeah. Yes?
You talked about the importance of coming from a place of not knowing and helping you find your own voice. And you also described yourself as a self-study in both visual arts and poetry. And I'm curious, what was your formal education prior to that?
Yeah, self-taught very much in both art and in writing. Though self-taught and well-read, I have learned from hundreds and hundreds of poets. My formal education, I went to Cornell University undergrad, and I studied what was called, I don't think it is still called, but what was called Human Development and Family Studies. And then for grad school, I went to Emerson College in Boston and studied communication studies. I wanted to color, honestly. I wanted to color. But I had no art background. And so I studied advertising and public relations. And the very first day when I walked into Emerson, I walked past a room where someone was performing. I didn't really know what was happening. I was on my way to my first class, and I slid in to the room to watch this seated man reciting from My Fair Lady some monologue by Eliza Doolittle. And I was just completely compelled. I mean, he was sitting down and I just stayed there. When he was done, he picked up first one cane and then another cane because he had had polio, and went from being this totally larger than life figure, and also in the sort of slum area of London, though he was in Boston, to now being a disabled man. And I went up to him and I said, whatever that was, like I would like, I'm new here and I would like you to be my advisor. And he said, who are you? And are you studying this, in my field? And the field, as I learned, was oral interpretation. And I said, no, but I'll switch. Like I was like, I don't care. I will. He said, I can't be your advisor if you're not in my whatever realm. And I said, could I double major? And he said, we don't do that here. And I was like, then fine, I'll switch. Like it just. So anyway, I didn't switch, but he was my advisor. I didn't really need him to advise me. I just needed to remember what a person can do.
This may have been covered before I got here. I was late. How does one get to be the poet laureate?
No, it was not covered. Well, you apply. In New Mexico, to be the state poet laureate, there's an application process. It's a kind of expansive application. It's, let's see, letter of intent or interest, references, writing samples, audio or video clips, and then an interview. And also the state moves glacially, so things are slow. But yeah, that's basically how it happens. Yeah.
I had another question.
Okay.
When I grew up in Lubbock, Texas, so to me, New Mexico was Route 66.
Okay.
Driving across through Tucumcari, and you go through Tucumcari forever. Driving on Route 66 and Santa Rosa, the same way you stay in those towns forever. I just wondered if you ever considered or maybe have written a poem about Route 66. I think that would be a great poem.
Maybe you need to write it because you have a lot of experience with it. I have not specifically. However, I will say that I had a wonderful time doing a poet laureate event in Tucumcari at the depot there. That was where we met for that event. And just hanging out in that area. So it might go on forever, but it's also memorable there. Yeah. But in truth, every community I went to turned out to be memorable. And I have to say, actually interacting with people as opposed to driving through, stopping for lunch or stopping for gas, but having a shared purpose was fantastic. And to go back to Sylvia's question, like, how did people receive us? It was amazing how much people thanked us, how everywhere, I mean, okay, like people are decent, but how they honestly thanked us for coming to their little communities when that was all we wanted to do was, when we would get asked to do things in Albuquerque, I was like, yeah, Albuquerque. I mean, no offense, but you have things here. You don't need the arts in exactly the same way as Reserve needs it, or somewhere else. Okay, you have a follow-up question?
Not really a question. Some years ago, I was driving through New Mexico on I-40 after the interstate had been completed, and I decided to get off and go through Tucumcari. And one of the fascinating and very interesting things I found out is there is quite a good dinosaur museum in Tucumcari. It's a surprising thing to find in a town like Tucumcari, but it's really very good.
All right.
That's the beginning of a poem.
Yeah, I know. See, that's all it takes. You're already started.
Were you able to visit the pueblos or the Navajo Indian Reservation?
We did not. We wanted to, and we asked for help from the tribal librarians to connect us, but we also felt like we needed a representative from the tribe, any of the tribes. And so, and we were not able to coordinate that with the librarians. What we were able to reach some some communities that had more native populations. In Gallup, we made a second trip back to Gallup specifically to reach a wider audience. The project, I didn't finish describing the project to you, though I did describe it in every venue we went to. The project evolved, it got bigger, but the initial plan was to create these poems for each community, gift one back to the community, keep one for exhibit. And the poems will be, it's not done yet, will be printed as broadsides. So for those of you who don't know, it's basically a large, beautiful poster kind of done by a printing press. And so that was the initial part of the project. The exhibit will be held at the Palace of the Governors. We're doing a call for artists from any of the communities and tribes that we did not reach, specifically from the places we did not reach, to sort of widen, to make sure it covers as much of the state as we can. And then our hope after that is to build a book of the poems and the artwork. Yeah. Yes?
I think it's such a beautiful idea that you gather from so many people all of their feelings. But one thing that I wanted to ask you is, did you need releases from the people? Do you have to attribute? Will there be I should think in fairness, there'd be a list of who said what?
We considered that. At the beginning, we gathered people's names and found that people didn't often want to put their names on it because they wanted to be able to write what they wanted. So then we started making it optional, and then we stopped asking because we were already only asking for first name, last initial. Also, the phrases that we're pulling are sometimes small. It's not like I'm coming to this audience and saying, everybody write me a poem. I'm not. I'm directing with some particular prompts and then pulling bits and really weaving them together. So it became a thing where perhaps you would recognize, also there's a long lag time between when people wrote and when they will see this poem. I mean, it could be 3 years for some people. So will they still remember exactly what they wrote? I don't know. A few people took pictures of the cards they wrote on them, and even one person in Taos even posted it. And I was like, oof, you don't yet know what we're gonna do with that. So, yeah. Yes.
How do you use geography to create your prompts?
To create my prompts. Actually, I want to turn that question a little around because geography, I think of the writing I do. I guess I'll get back to the prompts, but I think of the writing I do as writing into place. That's how I describe it. I am not necessarily writing about a place because that by itself is not interesting to me, but I am using what I notice or what I attend to about a place to then sort of drag me into something else I'm thinking about. Something like, perhaps you saw that in the poem I read about worry, like writing right into what's happening outside my window, but also into how worried I am about our greater culture. The prompts as I traveled around the state were all about place. They were all about people's particular places. And I mentioned Reserve, which was just a wonderful community to be in. I think it's a population of 306, I'm not sure. So we had a small percentage of people who came and who were so enthusiastic. I don't think they'd ever had anything like this before. We met in the library, which is about a quarter the size of this room. And there was one, I mean, they were so excited. It was almost impossible to settle them down. There was one woman in there who was like, I write every day, all the time. And I said something about reserve and driving into reserve. And, you know, I have to tell you, we went to Socorro the day before in a blizzard. I mean, it was the weather was so bad as we were coming into Socorro that everything in the entire city was closed except the library where we met. And nobody came out for it because everything was closed. I mean, we had two people who came, the librarian who was already at work and a woman who was a teacher. And luckily those two came because they were then able, because I can't build a crowdsourced poem from two people. That does not work. But those two people were able to take the prompts and the idea out to their communities and to send us back a bunch of material so we could build the poem. But anyway, so we came through this crazy weather in Socorro, and then the next day through gorgeous snow and sleet and everything to get to reserve. And so I was talking about how beautiful it was. And I asked this very excitable woman if, you know, she writes about there, where she lives. And she said, no, it never occurred to me. But why not? You know, but I mean, this is what we have, is where we are, whether you're looking out at a parking lot or you're looking out at a maple tree or you're looking out at, you know, something grander, why not start there? And so that was really, really what I was doing, was building a space where we could honor their places and acknowledge them, you know. And I was very clear, I cannot come into Raton or Mountain Air or Artesia or Deming and write this poem. I might know how to write a poem, it's questionable every time, but I don't know how to write about here. You know here. So let's do this together.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. It's been very interesting. You know, I'm not interested in writing poetry, but I'm interested in learning how to read it or experience it better. So I wonder what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I think poetry is not as simple as it would seem to an outsider who looks and sees something small and thinks, okay, I can do this quickly. I think poems take time. I think they take a couple of readings at minimum. And I think also that not every poem is for every person. You know, I teach, I've taught for a long time, and I am forever explaining to my students that there's not a right way to read a poem. If I get 10 people in a room together and show a poem, we can have 10 different perspectives on it, you know, and we do. And we have arguments. I mean, I moderate arguments between them. No, this poem is about this, or, you know, and there isn't that right way to do it. So if you come across a poem that you like for some reason, that intrigues you for some reason, read it again, read it aloud. Read it aloud, listen to it, because sometimes, often sound or music is a part of the poem. You know, like even as I was reading, this is nuts, but as I was reading one of that longer poem from my first book, which I haven't read aloud in a long time, I was listening to the long O sounds at the very end, and I was like, oh yeah, I was like, as I was reading aloud to you, I was thinking, oh yeah, I had this conversation with my students the other day about the long O sounds at the end of some other poem. Like, just spend time with the things you enjoy and try to figure out a little of where it is, like what it makes you feel, perhaps, or why, or, you know, and I think more than anything, poems allow and require that we slow down. Okay? Yeah, yes.
I'm gonna ask the question I asked you.
Okay.
during break. How do you come up with your titles for your books and poems?
Yeah, we had a whole little conversation about titles, and actually, part of what I want to say is the response I gave, because you said you don't title your drafts, and just for anyone else in the audience who is writing, or like especially writing, put some kind of title to your work in that first draft, because if you don't title it, then you have to create a title out of nothing when you come back to revise it. If you title it even with some crappy title, you have something to react to the next time. You have a way to say, oh no, that's not quite right, or whatever. If you don't put anything, you have a blank space. And while this is very much a personal opinion, but while I feel like artwork could be untitled, maybe music could be untitled, I feel like writing, because we are working in the realm of language, missing a title is a real lost opportunity, because that's the way into the poem. That's the very first thing that someone sees. I have now titled so many things. I've titled artworks, but I couldn't make as many artworks as I could poems. I've titled 1,000 poems. I've titled now 9 books. When something doesn't work, when a draft doesn't work, I think I mentioned, a lot of times I will change the title just as a way to see in a new way. I think titles matter so much. I do think there's a right title for a thing, for a poem, and I enjoy the process of figuring it out. I don't know that I can specifically say how it comes up. I want something complex. I want something that has maybe some curiosity to it. And I want something that makes, especially for books, I want something that also makes sense for the whole. Yeah. Yes?
Do you ever write yourself into a corner just to feel the danger?
I guess I'm not totally sure what you mean by that, but I have written things that certainly feel very dangerous to me. I think mostly because I feel vulnerable, but I'm not totally sure that's what you mean by that.
Creating an impossible beginning that you don't know how you could possibly go from there, but yet somehow you do.
Oh yeah, I do that all the time. That's different. That's different. So I've now written lots and lots of poems, but also lots of drafts. And for the first years I was writing, I would write a complete draft. I knew more or less what I wanted it to hold. I might not know how it was going to resolve, but I basically had a substantial draft. It's either that I've now written a lot of poems, or that time started to be elusive. And now I write bits. Like they're not drafts. They're just kind of a little portion. So it starts from a place of not just unknowing, but incomplete. And then I've got to come back to it whenever it is I come back to it and do something with it. And so I've lately, when I have time, been coming back to like mediocre drafts, that's pretty generous, incomplete drafts, and trying to figure out what to do with them if I want to do something. And so my sense of like, does it feel dangerous? It feels like work, honestly. It just feels like, oh, this is not complete enough for me to know where I was going, kind of thing. And so one of my techniques for myself of working with that is to smush a couple of drafts together. Or to do that plus to add something new that is true of me right now, like how I'm feeling now. I don't know that I think of that as dangerous exactly, but I do think that it allows the poems to evolve in some magnificent ways. Yeah.
Is there a better way, either in the education system or just culturally, for us to approach the idea of writing poetry or writing anything for that matter? And the reason what I mean by that is just for my own life. My dad is not an educated man, but to hear him speak, he speaks in a very poetic way.
Mm-hmm.
One of my earliest memories of him was when he told me about the first time he ever saw Johnny Bench play for the Cincinnati Reds. And you would have thought that the things that he's just rolling off the top of his head were written by Walt Whitman. And later on, and he spoke that way about almost everything. And later on, I asked him if he ever thought of writing things down, like a poem or a story or anything. He's like, oh, I can't do that.
Yeah.
It's like there's a velvet rope that I think a lot of people feel. Is there a way that we can, as a culture or as an education system, make everybody recognize that whatever your experience is, that is poetry, that is literature?
Yeah, I 100% believe that everybody's experience, everybody's life, everybody's history matters and is valuable. I don't know within our education system, because that's designed to move toward a test and toward you will come away with these clear, with this clear rubric. But the classes that I teach are really, the audience that I primarily teach is older adults, and they show up at these classes, which are creative writing. They're not poetry specific, but I'm a poet and I bring poems to them. And they show up, and a lot of them want to write about their lives. They don't know how. They've had fascinating lives, whether they've lived in the same place forever or they've traveled the world. They've had interesting lives just because they've lived that many years, but they're also like 8-year-olds. They're enthusiastic and curious. They show up, and I guess I want to tell you about this one man who just died, maybe late spring, I think, at the age of 93 and a half. He came into my class at age 80 for the first time. He was a retired Russian Orthodox priest, and a really good one. And he wanted to write about his fascinating life growing up in South Dakota, and his grandmother who used a washboard to clean their clothes, and the mangle and all the things that were just ordinary but also are now not ordinary. He came to the class, and really big presence, a big man, and And I could talk about him for a long time, but I will say that when he left, he said, I was teaching at the community college, and I said, come over here with me, now that this class is over, come over here with me to these classes. And I put poems up in front of him and other people, and he specifically said, I don't like poetry. And I said, I bet I know why. I bet someone at some point many decades ago said to you, what does this poem mean? Whatever the poem was, and you raised your hand as a young child and said, whatever you said, and the teacher said no. Right? So my goal, person by person, that I am teaching, guiding, facilitating, I'm not really teaching. It's more like opening a space, is to say, I don't know better than you what this poem means. This poem means something different to you because you have a different experience. You come to it from a different understanding, from a different body, from a different history, from a different anything. So what, you open the poem to me. So that's why it was hard to answer the question of how to better read. Part of it is sometimes to read in community so that you can see how many different ways there are. There's not a right way to read or understand a poem. I wish teachers could put that out there more. Maybe some do. Yeah.
Would you say there's a clear line of demarcation, let's say, between poetry and non-poetry, such that you can like put it into a rule or something like that?
Yeah, like between poetry and prose, you mean, or something?
Or just any say like a scientific statement, or like, let's say a collection of scientific statements that I happen to find very poetic or something like that.
Image, metaphor, music, economy of language, negative space. Some of those get used also in other writing. Some don't. One of the things that poetry has that is both a gift and a responsibility is the line break. And if, prose doesn't have that. Prose has paragraphs and chapters maybe, and that's it. And the line break means that you have, a poem has X number of lines, and every single line gets taken on its own, for its own sort of understanding before it accrues another line that might still be part of that same sentence or same thought. So I think more than anything else, that line break gives you a unit of sense that might be different from the complete thought. And it gives you a space and silence, and like sound and silence that you don't get in other sorts of writing. Yeah. Yes.
I was struck by your phrase in your last poem that says being in love with the world. And it just kind of said, oh yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I found lately that I felt that sense of being in love with the world and of the people in it. And I've wanted to capture those feelings, and I started writing haiku.
Okay.
And I'll sketch one out, and walking the dogs, I think, no, that doesn't fit, there's a better word here, or I have to shift the syllables here.
Mm-hmm.
But when I get a successful haiku and send it to someone to say, this is how I felt at this time about you, or this is what I felt about the gorgeous golden leaves on this fall day, it seems to me that it's a gift that I can give them that is quite different from just saying, I really enjoyed spending time with you yesterday.
Yeah.
It is something that's a little package that I've mulled over and done to the best of my ability, but it doesn't have to be long.
Yeah,
In fact, it's very constrained.
Yeah, you've made something for them. I love that idea of a gift. I think of poetry as a whole as a gift. You know, a poem as a gift to someone. I mean, it's not you know, there's no money exchanging really hands as someone writes a poem and reads it out to an audience. It's a gift, and whether it works for you or not, you know, not, like I said, not every poem works for everybody, but to make something specifically to gift to a particular person is a beautiful thing. Yeah. And gives you a built-in audience too, right? Which can be really valuable. Yeah. Okay.
I'm just curious, when you transitioned from fiber art to poetry, did you write about your fiber art? Or did you just leave it behind?
Well, I wrote poems to companion the fiber art. Is that what you mean?
I mean, like after, when you're done fiber art, did you revisit it in poetry?
Yeah, actually, I did. I had, I think it was in my second book, there was a review that came out, and the reviewer said something about all the language I used that was about, that in some way was related to the art making, like that was about, I don't exactly even remember what he, like I didn't weave, but like words like woven and ways that I was in some way dealing with a textile quality. So it definitely, I didn't write directly about it too often, or I would write these like elusive references that someone else might not understand, but like scissors might end up in there, or a needle or something. And that wouldn't be what the poem was about or what the writing was about, but it would be in there and I would know exactly what it was holding, like what experience. Yeah.
Comment or a kind of question about listening to poetry being read, particularly poems that you haven't heard before. We were talking about how your words were kind of filling us up and then they would just disappear because they were unfamiliar. And it seemed to me it was kind of like more set in time the way music is, and it just kind of keeps going. So I wondered if you could comment on that.
I do think there's a difference between listening to poetry and reading it. That one is sort of like going to a concert or a play or something where it's in front of you or you're in the midst of it and then it is gone and you only have what you carry away, whether it's a phrase or a feeling or a different mood maybe, versus something you have in a book that you can sit with, or or whatever, in a chapbook or a book or a journal or an anthology or whatever, that you can sit with and go over and over and hear inside yourself, is so different from hearing it aloud. But I do think poetry is sort of benefits from being heard aloud. I mean, that's a generalization, so that's not an always, but that's how it started. As long before, like there are a lot of poetic forms that have repeats or things that return because it was an oral form that was done in a large amphitheater. People would gather and they needed those repeats to be able to catch something, hold it, and keep their attention. So I think in a lot of ways, the listening, you're not going to catch and keep everything. And that's okay. Yeah. Yes?
This might be kind of a hard question to answer, but I'll give it a try.
I was first exposed to poetry when I was probably in 8th or 9th grade. I was less than impressed. The confinement that the instructors put on the form made it seem very boring to me. Then I was exposed to some things from the Beat generation, like Allen Ginsberg, for example, and the How. And it's been my opinion, and I don't know if it's shared with anybody else because I've never really talked to anybody about it, but it seemed to me that musicians like Bob Dylan, Leonard Cohen, Tom Waits, more recently Bruce Springsteen, are basically writing poems and then making them fit with music.
Okay.
So, I mean, what stricture do you put on what's a poem and what's not? I've recently read some things that there's some folks that believe that hip hop is another form of poetry.
I sort of think it's for whoever is doing it to self-identify. You know, how, I mean, that is a hard question because is Bob Dylan a poet? Didn't he start as a poet, I believe, and then moved into music? You know, I don't know. There's a part of me that wants to keep poetry sort of a little more sacred. I don't think that's the right word, but because once we pull in rock and roll to then, you know, rock and roll or music has its own stronger community. And so I kind of want to keep poetry as like a safe place for the people who aren't putting it together with music. But that doesn't mean that like a lyricist, like, you know, looking at Joni Mitchell lyrics could be, I mean, they can be extraordinary, or, you know, any number of people. So what makes a poem? I don't know. I mean, there are people out there now doing erasure poems, and where they're basically blocking out text and leaving bits. Is that a poem? Sure, if that's what you want to call it, absolutely. But I think, which is what makes it kind of difficult to answer a question like what exactly is a poem, because there are many different people doing many different things. And then there's the, you know, the modernist and the postmodernist and the, you know, like they're the people who want to react against what came before. And so are poems only narrative? Are poems only lyric? Are poems only sonnets? Or, you know, I think there's so many things. And so I'm going to stick with that, how people want to self-identify. Does, you know, does Tom Waits identify as a poet? I don't know. Maybe. Yeah. Yes?
Do you have a favorite poet?
Ooh, another hard question. Well, and I'll tell you why. Because when I was doing my radio show, I would read 3 to 5 books a week. And I would take something from each of them. Sometimes it was just an understanding of how else I might describe some things. Sometimes it was something I didn't like, honestly. And that would be a very good lesson for me. So in other words, it's really hard for me to settle down. Like I've read very widely, and it's really hard for me to say this one poet, this one person, because my curiosity about the genre changes. It just grows and grows all the time. Favorite poets right now are different from favorite poets at a different time. As I was driving down, I was re-listening to a conversation with the poet Marie Howe, who is actually a poet I was first introduced to, I don't know, right at the beginning. And she just won the Pulitzer Prize. for a new and selected book. And she's a good one for now. Ellen Bryant Voigt's a good one for now. But then also, I just read a poem by Kevin Proofer that reminded me, oh, let's go back to that. And so favorite's hard. Yeah.
Just a shot in the dark, but did you ever meet or read Lucy Tapahanso?
Yes, I did a performance with Lucy at National Dance Institute. We were both reading our poems, and the young people were building dances from them.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah, it was a couple of years ago.
Yeah, she's an old friend that I've known for years.
Yeah, she's a special person. Yeah, yeah. Yes.
Bob Dylan won the Nobel Prize for Literature, so I think the Nobel Committee is telling us that he is in fact a poet. And on a related note, I'm a great fan of the popular songs of what's called the Great American Songbook period, George Gershwin and Harold Arlen and so on. And the people that wrote their lyrics, Ira Gershwin wrote most of the lyrics for his brother George, and a guy named E.Y. Harburg wrote most of the lyrics of Harold Arlen's songs.
Right.
And Cole Porter, of course, wrote his own lyrics. And I think those are poems. And I had almost an argument with a friend of mine one time, now deceased, and about whether a great song lyric is a poem. And I feel very strongly that it is.
Well, again, I mean, I'm back to that. You know, I've thought about this a lot because I remember that whole watching the poetry community go around and around about the Bob Dylan Nobel Prize. And really what I've come to is my opinion's one of many. And really, it's not more right than anyone else's. So, yeah. Yes.
Is there a poem you come back to time after time as you get older that maybe tells you different things as you age and your life changes?
There are several, but W.S. Merwin's Thanks is one poem that is very meaningful to me. There's a Philip Levine poem called They Feed, They Lion that I also really, they're so different, those two. There are many. There's like I have like a small canon of things that when they show up in front of me for whatever reason, I'm like, oh, this one, I love this one. This one's important. Yes?
Just a quick thought. I recently saw streaming versions of a Bruce Springsteen concert that was hours long, and likewise a Bob Dylan movie. And just for fun, I turned on closed captions. And what that seemed to do is it seemed to draw you into the poetry more than just listening to the song does.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And the only other comment I have to say is Bob Dylan's muse fed him like a fire hose because of the volume of stuff that he put out.
Yeah.
Some of it good, some of it not so good,
Yeah.
but a huge volume though.
Yeah. Well, and I think with the captions, you're now reading, right? So it's such a different way to listen, you know, to listen to music being performed. Anyone else? One more. Yeah.
Workshops. Do you give workshops? Do you hold workshops?
I do hold workshops. I teach generative classes designed to help people generate, like start from nothing. And I talk a lot about revision, which we've not really talked about here, but because I love revision, so I do talk a lot about it in there. The workshops that I teach moved online during the pandemic, and so that's how I do them. If anyone here wants to be on my mailing list, just give me your name and your email address and I will add you on there. I will say the classes are pretty small, and I have some regular students who I describe like piranha. Because when I put out a class announcement, they're fast, but if anyone's interested, I'd be happy to add you into the pool. Yeah. Thank you all so much.
A couple of quick things before we're finished. If anybody's interested in joining us for lunch, we're going to go over to Ramona's Cafe, which is on the other side of Rio Grande Boulevard. And I think I'm pointing in the right direction.